Welcome back to the Redacted Culture Cast. Today's guest, Tim Selbrede. He's been on before. We've known each other for some time, and the interconnected nature of my circle gets deeper. But today, a subject that I wanted to talk with you about, and I've been looking forward to this conversation, is on night vision and particularly its application. So, Tim, would you mind giving a little introduction to who you are?
Hi, my name is Tim Selbrede. I work for Maximum Defense. I've been on the podcast once before. We talked about a little bit my relationship with Darcy and a couple of the courses that I've gotten a chance to go through there. I recently got a chance to graduate from the Tactical Night Vision Instructor course in Las Vegas, and my background's with the Second Ranger Battalion, U.S. Forest Service, and yeah, kind of all over the place.
The nepotism will continue until I get results. So,
Yeah,
Rangers lead the way.
all over.
Yeah, right. Ooh, just don't till Valhalla, brother me. That's all I'm asking.
Yeah.
Oh, that aged like milk. Alrighty. So you let's start with the big one. You just graduated the was it the night vision instructors course out of Las Vegas. What were the like? How was that different than when you started using night vision?
So my introduction to night vision, like many of us, was military based. I think the very first set of night vision I ever wore was a set of PBS 14s with single tubes. Back when I had gotten to Second Raider Battalion, and even back then in 2006, those 2007, those were awesome. I mean, those were pretty darn good. And of course, your level of training in the military when you're in a Ranger training cycle, which is to say, after deployment is kind of the beginning of a training cycle, and then goes all the way up until we are going to deploy, and then those training gates get progressively more complex and more. There's more to them. Um, there isn't a lot of emphasis on like training with night vision. It's just like, all right, glue them to your face. Don't lose those, or you're gonna do push-ups until like God comes back. Um, there isn't any like, all right, okay, focus it. Can you see Roger? It's never really like, how does your brain see in night vision? How does the human brain and the eye interact? How do night vision devices work? Um, there's never really been like a deep dive class, at least at the ground level. There was never a lot of deep dive classes on like doing parallel zeros or um, converging zero and what's the benefit to each one and the other. It was just if you get into more advanced shooting in battalion, you would get a lot more of that information. But generally speaking, for the lay ranger, it was like, all right, man, here's your night vision, go to work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, with this, and of course, if I could stay in the theme of battalion, of course, we started getting more advanced night vision as we kind of progressed. I think I went from having a pair of 14s and a pair of 15s, which were great. They were very good dual tube night vision, but they were so front heavy, and we had to have to like Velcro our embitters to our helmets to kind of like get as a counterweight. And the swing arm for those it just looked like a big old gooseneck. It was just got really high. And then I ended up finishing my last couple of deployments out wearing a pair of sixes because I liked the way that they rotated. Those are more designed for helicopter and flight operations where people have less head clearance and they're working in tighter confined spaces. So really, our experience with night vision coming out of battalion is vast as far as we've used it a lot, but not a lot of people know what's going on or how to like implement it or how to train somebody on it. It's just like you were expected to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
So flash forward to the modern area of night vision, there's been just so much that goes on. I personally, even though I just went through the class, you're not going to get me to feel like, oh, those are 32 A's and those are 31 A's. And like, I'm not able to like recognize them off the streets, but understanding what goes into night vision, kind of the ins and outs of why we pick certain colors for certain objectives and like what's the mission. Again, because like all gear should be based off the mission, not the mission off the gear, right? Night vision should be no different than that. Same with a laser device. But also how to teach night vision. That was the big emphasis on this. This wasn't a shooting course. This was an instructor's course. This is an instructor development class geared mostly to law enforcement agencies. So If a law enforcement agency has already a night vision program in place or they're trying to get it off the ground, it was taught to all that level spectrum where, all right, you don't know anything about night vision all the way to, okay, here, this will pass the city council and the lawyers and this will stand in court. Because night vision in law enforcement is still a slow moving to get kind of caught up with the times tool. And for the disclaimer, I'm not a cop. I've never been a cop. I just work around them a lot, and we kind of get to see where they're hesitant to use it because they just don't understand its capabilities. So yeah, that was a long version introduction.
It is a long version of an introduction, but it's also going to be a perfect segue. Is that like quite oftentimes in Ranger Battalion, it's you almost think of like teaching night vision in Ranger Battalion like an oral history. It's not
Yeah.
exactly written down anywhere. There isn't any doctrine, but it gets passed from team leader to like team leader to private, who becomes a team leader, who passes it to the private, and it just kind of rolls through these years and generations in this continual process.
Well, so there's certainly stuff, if I may, there's certainly stuff in battalion written down. I mean, God knows that we had like a paragraph or two about socks, right? So you know night vision is going to have a chapter or two written on it. But
Yes.
it isn't passed down to Joe Schmuckatelli, who's just trying to survive his first 7 months and remember where the bathrooms are and then in the order in which to sit at the chow hall. You know what I mean? Like that kid is not reading policy right now.
No, 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 no. And it's not even policy. It's just that it's like you get there's the benefits and drawbacks of that form of education, that form of
Mhm.
passing it on. Like, and I remember
Yeah.
for me, I had a very zealous team leader who would basically just grab the squad and we'd put on nods and we'd run around in the woods and we'd just do like battle drill 1 alpha in the woods until so you could learn things like depth perception and how to
Sure.
move and how to like
Yeah.
reload and how to you can't use your eyes for anything, so you're like, oh, I need to get this thing out, or I need to figure out how to do this thing, I need to run my radio, I need to be able to navigate and strobes and all these other kind of issues.
Mhm.
And so we learned in a good my experience, I learned for better and for worse in some cases the the applicate using night vision just by doing it all the time.
Yeah.
It's like I remember getting on to my first deployment and I was using a 14. I had a monocular and they put me in a striker. I'd never driven a striker before, which is like a 42,000 pound vehicle.
Good
And
luck. Yeah. The
and
canopy.
I've got a monocular and I've basically never used night vision before, and they're like telling me how to drive this thing while yelling at me because that's what happens. You just
It's
got to
the
kind of put on.
Baghdad. It's the Baghdad convertible
Yeah.
creator.
So yeah, all right. So I'm like trying to drive this eight
Shut up.
wheeled this 8 wheeled giant vehicle with one eye, and while that and then learning how to climb a ladder and learning how to like move around, which sounds so ridiculous, like, oh, you need instruction how to climb a ladder, but like, yes,
Oh, oh yeah. Have you ever like tried to swap out your batteries? Like that's a
exactly.
drill that we actually did. We actually did buddy and self battery swaps. We did it in the prone, kneeling. We did a couple little various positions, just like as a way to say, like, hey, this seems like it would be easy. You've also
Mm-hmm.
been wearing these for 20 years, guys. Like, how about the guy that just got his first set?
Mm.
Make him practice doing little like level one drills. But go ahead.
So then, now that you've taken this instructor course, if you were to go back to team leader time when you were in that position, how would you have changed the way that you taught your own minions? How has it changed the way that you would teach night vision?
So I would kind of, and I'm not entirely sure because I was never a formally trained like Ranger Regiment instructor as far as like a trainer course or anything like that, where I'm not entirely sure they mirror it the same way law enforcement seems to mirror it in the sense that they like to like put it in gates like 1 through 6, right? Level
Sure,
six
sure,
is
sure.
the high course level, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
would kind of create it at the level 1 through 3 level where it's like, all right, level one, we're knocking out in the room here. This is how to turn it on. This is
Mm-hmm.
in the order in which to turn some of these devices on, because depending on the device, it's going to be like, hey, don't plug this lead in until this is in, or don't open it up until like you're in a certain scenario or environment. Because depending on the model, they can be very sensitive. But I would also have them practice doing like we were practicing knocking out just, hey, put them on and off. Take them on and off in the dark. On your knees while laying on the prone. Just practice taking them on and off, helping your buddy put them on and off, changing on a battery on your own, changing your buddy's batteries. If you're in a gun position on a BP, just you and your assistant gunner, I mean, your batteries go dead, which they shouldn't be, 'cause you should be put fresh ones in. But if they do go dead on a long mission, right, you might need to have a buddy swap them out for you, right? We did a lot of malfunction drills with our rifles. We laid out every single one of our rifles, right? So there was approximately 20 students. We laid them all of our rifles out on the line, and everyone's rifle and late illuminator is totally different, right? A lot of BE Myers was there. There's a lot of that represented, a lot of malls. There was some, Engals there. There was some Steiners there. And every gun had a different malfunction, whether it was a type 1 malfunction, just like, hey, tap racket and get back into the fight, or there was stovepipes in there. We had a couple of bolt overrides, which were fun to do under night vision. And the idea, we turned it into a PT session, so we had to take, get a knee, stand up, get a knee, stand up, get a knee, stand up, which was fun after like 7 guns. But every
Good
gun was going to
feats.
be, yeah, right. Every gun's going to be different. Every illuminator is going to be slightly different operating, and everyone's switches are slightly different. And we had to, with night vision on, figure out just what that malfunction was based off of what the trigger is telling us it's doing, and then fix the malfunction, take a shot, and then we go on to the next one. And then the guy behind you, his job is to reset various malfunctions. So we also learned how to intentionally jam up guns in certain
Okay.
ways. And so as a team leader, I would start, that would be like the highest level I'd go for, like a level 3. Like, all right, hey, we're gonna get to a level where we're under night vision. We can do the basics, just swapping them out, turning them on, installing them, swapping batteries out, all the way to, okay, we're doing malfunction drills with this safely. We're on a knee, we're taking a shot at the range, right? We're gonna do stovepipes, we're gonna do bolt overrides, we're gonna do A, B, and C. So that would be more what I would start to focus with on the guys, um, as a team leader level.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to like changing batteries, which sounds like such a simple thing, but I have a very kind of vivid memory from a deployment I was on where we were walking through this area that was kind of it was a very odd area because you would have like thick jungle right next to like barren desert. And so
Yeah,
we were in this thick vegetation, and my battery light went on my set of night vision, and this I think at this time I think one of the things that we learned later was even having to do with like battery storage, because how we stored batteries at the time is we opened up the box and we dumped the box into a big wooden crate, and the batteries just all sat there charging and discharging or losing battery power on their own. And so, yeah, sure, a CR123 A or whatever, a 123 battery in your night vision was supposed to last 8, 9 hours, 12 hours, whatever. But some would last 4, 5, 6. Some would last 9. Like some would last the full
yeah,
duration, and some would only last half. And I was walking, and while this can be in some sense mitigated by storage, this is not the first. This was not the only time I had to do this. But I'm a private. I am keeping mental awareness of where my team leader is, where the other private is, where the squad is, the direction of travel, and I can't stop the whole platoon and say, "Hey, I got to change the battery." One, because I don't want to get smoked for the next 9 hours, and two, that just happens. And so
yeah,
sometimes you can be preemptive and like add a long pause, prep the battery, keeping them in a known pocket where you know they're going to be at all times, so that in the event that something goes out, I know where that battery is or those batteries are. They're always in the same pouch. They're always in the same pocket. And
yeah,
so while walking, I pulled the battery out, unscrewed the cap, took the old battery out, put the new battery in, screwed the cap back on, and continued on the operation multiple times. This became something that happened. I mean, I'm not. It's not like it happened every mission, but it would happen
sure,
somewhat regularly, and those are the small things that add up over time, and that seems to
yeah,
be what a lot of night vision is the small things. Like, yeah, sure, you got to learn how to reload your rifle under night vision because you can't look at the mag well because you're using nods, but also changing the battery. What is the orientation of your battery? Is the nipple out or is the nipple in on your
exactly.
nods,
Yeah,
on your laser,
it's,
on your
everything's gonna be different. Everyone's shit's gonna be different, right? Especially if you're in a platoon, at least generally speaking, everyone's equipment is semi-universal. But in the in the civilian market, I mean, we're gonna be having every bit of spectrum. I mean, it's not don't discount the idea of someone showing up to your range event with wearing sevens. You know what I mean? Like
Sure.
it happens. And look, if a guy's got sevens, the guy's got sevens, man. At least you can see in the dark. Right battery selection is huge. We don't want to use alkaline batteries. We don't want to use rechargeable batteries. We want to use lithium only, right? So
Okay.
lithium ion batteries for night vision should be what the only thing anyone uses. Um, and I, if we're budgeting for like a team, right? If for like a law enforcement agency or a professional team that's going to be wearing these, for every individual that has batteries, we should be accounting for about 6 months worth of batteries in their general supply. That's not to say that you're going to be wearing your night vision every day. That's going to obviously screw that number up. But, generally speaking, if we're going to be going through batteries and needing to put fresh ones in there for missions, right? Not just like our range use where we can drown that battery out and chuck it out and swap them over out there farting around the range. But like if we're taking like our life into account here and we need to do a mission, we want to put fresh juice in all the time. We want to account for about 6 months of inventory. And again, those are lithiums. We don't want to use rechargeables. We don't want to use alkaline.
So I can understand rechargeables, particularly in the sense that rechargeables like degrade over time. At least that's
Mhm.
my experience with them. But why not alkaline? Is there anything? Is it just not enough power output?
I'm not sure. I don't have that answer. It was just
Huh.
kind of emphasized heavily to us by the staff, like, hey, just the lithium batteries, I think, are just more reliable. And I think there's also a risk of alkaline, maybe with the power demands, maybe like causing
Mm,
damage to the batteries themselves, and thus, like, same with rechargeables, a risk of them damaging the units.
okay.
So I
That,
wish I had a more scientific answer for you, but I don't.
well, and I, if I'm going to go out on a limb here, I think one of the other ones is just the damage of, like you said, if an alkaline battery goes bad, starts leaking, it can leak into the housing and destroy the entire housing, and then that's of
And these are a lot of
13.
investments for those that haven't looked into night vision. Like if you start playing the math game, you can get night vision ranging from between $3,000 for quality pair with a warranty, all the way up to $40,000 for certain
Mm-hmm.
pairs. So like there's a
Yeah.
large. So these are investments. These are lifetime investments, and you have to maintain these. They
Mm-hmm.
do require some maintenance. So buyer beware when you're on the used market. There's great deals to be found, and there's trustworthy people selling it, but you want to, having working with vetted companies like TNBC or Focus, like folks that have warranties, those are going to be really big because as night vision has progressed in its generations and designs, it's not only just because, oh, look, it looks better and I can see more betters through it. It's little things that, especially the military, has learned, where we had certain night vision models that exist in the past where they just couldn't be around, explosive breaches. Like a minimal amount of movement in some of those inner workings caused the units to go bad. So, um, yeah,
Yeah, that and those are mission specific things. If you're going to be using breaching, then if you're going to be using explosive charges to breach, then your night vision better be able to withstand the MSD or the minimal and safe distance pressure wave
yeah.
that you will encounter. Those things make sense. Okay, cool. So then, so from a learning perspective, then, as if you can look back at how you've learned in the past and how you've seen it taught again, how how would you change how would you change the way that you yourself would practice with night vision? How has that changed at all, if at all?
Well, if we're talking about just keeping it simple at flat range work, I would just add night vision to just another level of complexity for any of our normal drills. Obviously, we want to engage our students first, right? Gauge what their experience level is. You can get a lot of folks that talk a big game, have a ton of cash, and they have all the kit, and they look like they check out, but they're drowning under night vision when we start adding complexity to it, right? Because it's a joke. I can't hear you. I have my night vision on, right? Your body does start to prioritize its senses, and the way the human brain absorbs not all, but the majority of our intake comes from our visual
Mm-hmm.
sense, right? So if got folks drowning, we want to make sure that the training is safe, first of all, and also worth the student's time. I like to do decision making with drills. So like we can do a drill where we have like three targets set up and we say, we build like ladders, one shot, then two shots, and then three shots, and so on, right? Or pyramids. And we can say, hey, shoot 2-3-1, 1-2-3, 3-2-1, and so on. And we just run through a couple mags. We just can do drills like that where we're adding the decision making that they have to do, right? They have to kind of be aware of what the course of fire is, but there's some complexity with the night vision. Their holds, that's going to be a big thing. Getting students to get like I know passive aiming is a kind of like a newer topic over, and this is another conversation we can have about passive aiming and all that. But implementing passive aiming, but also getting students to be confident in their equipment is the big one.
Hmm. Yeah. So, for those who are not familiar, passive aiming, the difference between passive and active aiming when it comes to night vision is on a rifle or a carbine or an SMG or whatever that's equipped for night vision use, you will typically have a red dot as well as a laser identifier. And that laser identifier is usually running IR or an infrared laser so that it can only be picked up by people, it can only be seen by people also wearing night vision. And so active aiming is activating your laser and shooting your target, whereas passive aiming is not activating your laser but using that red dot as your aiming reticle.
Yeah,
And
and we see the need for that in places like where we have near peer adversaries, like somebody that might have night vision, like Russia and Ukraine. You shooting your laser is going to give your, origin away as well. It's not like we're in Afghanistan or Iraq where we had the advantage, right? So having the ability to shoot passive is a good skill, but it shouldn't be the only skill that people rely on.
okay, so let's talk about particularly passive aiming, active and passive aiming as an example of the skill side of the near peer conversation. I remember a couple of years ago that the word near peer entered into the general milieu, and it was like the talking point, right? It was like, oh, near peer laser thermals, thermal overlays, and like it still has its place. I asked the SEAL Team 6 guy about it, and he and this is not like authoritative, but his argument was, if we're worried about near peer assets, we're going to push deeper, or we're going to move different in the IR spectrum. He was not, and that was something that I hadn't even thought about before. But that was a technological answer to a problem, and we're talking about kind of the skills answer. And I think in some ways it looks like certain things that were taught 10, 15 years ago are still being taught, just with a greater emphasis, like not leaving your laser on. If you're like, if I'm concerned about other people that will be using night vision, I want to only use my laser when I need to, instead of
Yeah,
constantly searching around with it, because that laser is attached to your gun. And so that beam is a beacon directly to where you are.
you're attached
Uh,
to that gun,
and you are attached to, unless you're doing some sort of like a Home Alone stuff with like pulleys and, your rifle's
which
actually over here.
which we did all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Built
and you
automatons.
need to also talk about realisticness with application. So I've had the fortune of going through the level one and level two law enforcement counterterrorism course at Darcy. The level one is primarily with munitions, but level two is much, much faster. It is live fire. It is all it's under green screen pretty much from night one. Snipers are eventually integrated into the course where they're taking shots uh, feet from you into the room that you're in. You're doing explosive internal breaches. You're doing internal ballistic breaching with bangers. Like it's a running and gunning class. We're not taking obviously hostage rescue shots, live fire with live hostages. We do that with the simunition rounds, but we are taking somewhat deep shots on 3x5 cards, and you have to know your holds. And when we are talking about the difference between law enforcement training and application and likely execution and what military you guys are dealing with are vastly different games, right? It's like saying the XFL versus the NFL. It looks the same, but there are different rules. With football, with the military, everyone likes to do CQB. Yeah, it sells classes for instructor classes. I get it, right? But um, if you're in the military, man, if you're resisted in a room, we know what we're doing with that room. We're fucking throwing grenades into it. Law enforcement obviously is not doing that. If they are doing hostage rescue shots, like they're going to have to get in there and take very difficult low percentage shots, and that's what that class is designed for. It's
What?
designed for that Paris Bataclan movie theater situation, or what we just saw in Moscow today.
Yeah. What's a low percentage shot? What do you mean by that?
We're talking about low percentage shots, like we're shooting for like just this like headspace on a hostage taker. Someone holding a gun to somebody with a human shield kind of thing, and they pop their head off. Those shots are very doable. Those shots are
Yeah.
very doable with to an experienced shooter, but you have to know your holds over distances, and that changes with night vision. And what if that guy also has night vision? So we added lots of complexity into this course,
Hmm.
right?
So
Um,
a low percentage shot is a low percentage of body visibility. So you only have a small target. It's not
yeah, and a
like,
low percentage of hits. People
mm,
have a low percentage of hits on those targets,
yeah. Well, yes, that makes sense.
right? They're
So
they're
then,
difficult.
okay. So then, how did you like? I want to make sure we start. We kind of always start on the simple end and then build up really quickly to the kind of the big takeaways. And this one is
Sure.
knowing your holds. Okay,
Yeah.
so this was a topic that I've seen taught on whiteboards ad infinitum. But the hold, quite simply, on your rifle is that your muzzle, you're not looking down the barrel when you're pulling the trigger. You're looking through an optic or through iron
Yeah.
sights, and that iron sight is above your barrel. And so if you put the muzzle of your barrel up against your target, your red dot is going to see above it. Your red dot is going to be at one point, and your muzzle is going to be below that. And those two converge eventually, depending on your zero. And so knowing your holds is that, well, I know that my point of aim, point of impact, meaning I know where the point where my dot and my round converge is point of aim, point of impact. And I know that might be set at like 100 yards, but that means at 20 yards or even at 15 feet, the dot on my red dot is going to be 1.5 inches or 2 inches higher than where my bullet hits. And that's not because I'm flinching, it's because my dot is up here and my barrel is technically pointed down here.
Yeah.
Yep. Now, so how did you? Okay, and so you can fix that in a couple of ways. One of them is go to the range and shoot at different distances and know your holds. But
Mhm.
that is like that sounds a little bit more like book knowledge. Like, oh well, I know I'm shooting at rangefinder 25 yards. I know that my hold is going to be 1.5 inches, which looks about yay big. How did you train that in?
So I did a little bit of a couple things. Just experience with my weapon system. I already kind of knew where my stuff was. We've been shooting with the guys from Method Endeavors a lot, and a lot of those drills are kind of known distances, where I already know where if I'm shooting at 70 yards, which you're not doing that for hostage rescue shots, for what it's worth. Um, these shots are very up close. So knowing my holds kind of ahead of time from shooting, just having the experience. But I had a Mantis system, the Blackbeard specifically, and I just moved into this still empty house, and I just started putting targets up around different rooms and then on the hallways, and then just kind of running around here with my night vision and my gun on, and just kind of shooting lasers to see. All right, if I'm running into a room like the size of a bedroom, which are replicated in our shoot house, if I'm gonna have a target that's in this corner, where do I need to aim on the 3x5 card on the IPSC target to know that I'm gonna hit that 3x5 card? So I just kind of got used to knowing, okay, if I'm shooting from the living room down to the bathroom down the hallway, I'm gonna have to shoot about 2 inches or whatever. If I'm up close and personal on this guy, I got to shoot like 3 inches above the card to actually hit the card itself. And so I just kind of nerded out for a few days, couple weeks, more time than I'm proud to admit. But yeah, no, I just kind of just did the reps, man. I just kind of farted around here, knew where my shots were going to be at. I'm not saying
Mm-hmm.
that every shot that I had at Darcy was on the 3x5 cards. I probably threw a couple of them in there. But generally speaking, everybody that we were shooting with, if anyone missed the 3x5 card on the target, it was very minimal. So I feel like a lot of us were really on our stuff out there. It's a very intense, very fast paced class.
The Mantis Blackbeard is one laser training tool
Mhm.
that I think at this point in time, in my opinion, it's the only one that I think is great. Like every other one, they're not necessarily gimmicky, but it's that like this is a really good one for one application. And I've seen the Blackbeard used many times, and so I think they deserve credit for their success.
I think
Um,
we started talking about the well-rounded shooter. I've seen a couple other of the training companies on Instagram use like the graphic of a like a Venn diagram where you need to have live fire experience. You can't have too much live fire experience because then you start to become uber safe about everything and you get unrealistic. You need to do simunition training because pain is a great educator. But then you start getting sim brave because you start realizing that like, oh, I can just get shot and reset. And you also, I think, need to implement like dry fire slash mantis to work, and then all three of those combined, create a more well-rounded shooter. Um, because Rainy Battalion, that's all we really did was live fire stuff. We had in the beginning technology of some of the simunition rounds. We used those a couple times. I remember they seldom worked back in the day, but we definitely didn't have live fire. We had the Miles gear that never really seemed to work, but yeah, with the level one at Darcy is such a good introduction to these concepts of kind of just stacking the complexities and build up. And in June, I'm going to be going to the AOBT or the Advanced Operator Breacher Technique course, and that's going to be interesting because that's I think level one or level two kind of amplified. Um, but it's all under green screen. We're doing a lot of this under night vision, and to bring the conversation back to that, it's these little things like, hey, if you're a breacher or if anything, if you have some job, you need to be practicing these micro things under night vision medics. You need to be practicing getting IV access under night vision. You need to be practicing putting tourniquets on, even if you aren't just a medic. All these little things, everyone wants to shoot under night vision because it looks really dope on Instagram. I get it. But if you're going on an entire mission, right? Even if you're getting in a gunfight in that mission, you're doing everything else under night vision. Shooting is this much of that. Like, so like get practice driving in a safe way under night vision. Practice the little things, doing dead man drills, any of it, right? Practice messing with other people's rifles under night vision. What if, you need to use someone else's weapon and engage that? You should be experienced with an idea of what your other buddies are working on.
yeah, in the night vision like the night vision, I don't even want to say conversation. The state of night vision in the gun culture is very focused on shooting because that's sort of the big thing. Like that's not I wouldn't call it the
Sure.
penultimate, but like that's kind of the like it's gun culture. It's of course they're going to
It's
look
one
at
of the
that, but
hardest things to master.
it's hardest thing to master. But also I think the reason like I think one of the reasons why it's the thing that gets filmed so much is paradoxically because it's the most difficult for access.
I mean, it looks cool.
Particular
I'm not hating. I think it looks dope.
No, well, I mean, there's some parts of the country where like, where are you gonna go do that? Like, I moved from
Yeah.
Minnesota to Arizona, and as a civilian who is not in a government entity, who is not does not own a range, who does not have 1,000 acres, one major difference for me now is in Minnesota, I had extremely limited opportunities to shoot under night vision. So any chance I could, I'd want to film it, right? Whereas down
Mhm.
here, I can go any night, so long as there isn't like a fire ban in the desert or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I can go any night because I have access to public land, and so the novelty of it isn't really as much there, even though the novelty of it for me was removed many years ago in the military. So now I think what I believe is going on is that we're looking at kind of this stagnation where that plateau has been made, and I'm using myself as an example. Where like being able to shoot at night vision is much more accessible, and it is becoming more accessible, but now the question is, what? How do I do all the other things? How do I learn how to do how do I learn how to do land nav at night? Well, can you do land nav during the day? Can you do it at night?
Yeah. I mean, everything, and this is what this course is also kind of geared to, is to convince more of the bean counters at an agency and the lawyers for the city or a department to
Mm-hmm.
understand not to be so scared about implementing night vision. It's like anything that you do in the day, you can do under this, right? And it's the first day of the class is really getting into like physiology of sight and some anatomy, like talking about like different fields of views and all this other stuff to tap into when you have to talk to a court room and be like, I knew that we could take this shot based off of this training. This is the documentation that we have of all the training. We can prove that, like, no, lawyer, he can in fact make that shot. He can see it. Lots of little things like that. Talking about, I'm not going to butcher the phrase here, but basically talking about like some of the psychology that happens with people under stress and how when we are starting to add complexities like night vision, we're restricting stimulus and we're also at the same time introducing stimulus, right? We're restricted. Like again, people's hearing starts to go off because they're so overwhelmed they want to look through the glasses, right? And so just getting people kind of like brought up to those levels is it was kind of a big emphasis in this class. Again, it wasn't just a shooting class. Now, granted, I haven't shot this much ammo in 1 week outside of the military until I went to this class. I shot a lot, but it was so much more than that. It was so much more like how. Okay, we spent some time practicing zeros, like the difference between parallel zero and converging zero and benefits over either one, right?
On a
In the
laser.
class. Yeah, yeah, which we can get into that, but
Well, let's just
it was
dive
a
right in.
remember.
Let's dive right
Yeah,
into it.
well, let me cap this off. For instructors out there, remember what it was like to be a student, okay? And remember that you've been doing this for a long time, and we have to teach to the lowest common denominator sometimes in these classrooms in order for us to progress through these different performance gates. Here we go.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what is so instead of it being a debate between converging versus what is it, parallel zeros on a laser, let's start with explaining how that works, and then why you why what was your major takeaway as a guy who has used it in the past and now is you've got a very complex relationship with the application.
Yeah, there's some really good videos on YouTube. I wish I could remember the name of the gentleman that posted it, one that I watched before I went into this class, which I'm happy I did. But the general concept is when we have our zero, we have our laser. Maybe I should use a black pen. When we have our laser line of sight and our bore line of sight, which should be in line with our optic, right? At some point, they're going to have to meet, right? It's a zero. Same with our optics, same with our bore. We have to figure out where the bullet matches its flight path at a known distance with where my optic says it should be. The same is with the laser, except for the laser can be a little bit more complex because the lasers tend to not be directly in line with our line of sight and the barrel of the gun. They tend to be offset. They tend to be either on the side or up and to the right, depending on the model. So we have to take that into account. So one way that we can do it, and this is a fast, easy way sometimes. This is a never-ending debate, and I'll tell you where I prefer at the end. But people will put their dot on a known distance, and then they'll put the laser right next to it. Say, okay, if I'm at 100 yards and 50 yards and 200 yards, I know that, generally speaking, that laser is going to be slightly to the right or slightly to the left of where I want it to hit. Now you have to take into account the elevation drop, but the left and rights are about the same. It seems like it's an easy way of doing things. Then you have the converging zero, which is essentially I know the distance on my sight. I know that at 50 yards, my red dot is at point of aim, point of impact. I'm just going to take that laser and go bleh, and make it go right to that. Now, some guys will get poopy and say, well, you have to take into account your holds on the distances on the back end of that and on the front end of that. True. And that is correct. You do have to know that if I'm bringing my laser to a known distance, right, it's going to have some distance level here where it's not point of aim, point of impact. And then I have to compensate for that number in the opposite direction.
Mm-hmm.
These are very scientific explanation tools. And compensate. The thing is, when you look at what lasers actually do over distance and what it's still light, these lasers aren't keeping exact sizes and shapes over distances, right? So if I point a laser 2 feet in front of me, I know that it's a teeny tiny little dot. we demonstrated this at Las Vegas where we took the laser and shined it at like 600 yards away on the mountain, and you could see the dot. That dot is the size of a fucking beach ball when it gets out there, right?
Okay, yeah, because
So
it's a cone. It continues to
it's a
expand.
cone. It still is a cone at the end of the day, and it still does hit things in the atmosphere that cause it to reflect light and refract. And so the converging zero to a lot of people is the dominant in the correct way, which is my I adhere to like the converging zero method. That isn't to say that the parallel zeros are bad and they don't have a place. They do have an advantage to them, but they do have to be considered that as you get past that distance of, let's just keep using the 50 yards as an example. If I'm looking at that dot and I'm at a 500-yard shot, that dot is not, it has now enveloped the area where the impact zone will be because it is a cone.
Oh, okay.
It's easier if I
Yeah.
drew this out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense too. So I think so. I was always taught using the converging zero version, and when I every time I'd hear the parallel one, it would sound like it would initially sound pretty good, particularly
Briefly,
because it will. It's like okay, so you've got because you've got your barrel, which is in like a straight line. It's an infinite line, and for math, and then you've got your laser. And so if you take, I should just have one in the room here, but I don't. Shame on me. Please don't like raid my house while I'm recording, right? Um, but here the point being said is I don't have one in but your laser is like it's not only is it not your laser is not coming right out of, or not stacked on top with exceptions. I think I've got a CTF1 by Phantom Hill and their laser is right on top. But oftentimes these laser aiming modules have the laser off to the side, which is going to be more like on a clock at the like 1.5, 2 o'clock ish time or position if the muzzle
yeah,
is the dead center of the piece. So you've got two axes that you're navigating, and you're trying to meet those two axes with you're trying to meet that trajectory of that laser on both x-axis and y-axis and calculate that, including the trajectory of the bullet as it's traveling through flight. And so you'd think, well, if I can just take out the x-axis by just having this automatic adjustment where I know that I always have to shoot this far off, and that might extend infinitely forward, thinking I only have to shoot an inch and a half to the right or a perceived inch and a half to the right because I'm assuming my laser is straight and my barrel straight. All I got to do is compensate for height at distance. But I don't know
yeah.
if that works. It doesn't seem. I think the issue is at the distances where the argument of the um, the parallel zero would function are all the conditions of the use. I'm sorry, the diffusion of the laser negates the advantage already, and so therefore it's a lose-lose either way. And what you're restricted to is the distance by which you can engage accurately with a laser.
So people have to remember that the laser travels in a straight line, but the bullet path never does. Whether we're shooting with a laser or without a laser, the bullet path is never a straight line. It does move, and
Yes.
it has up, down, left, and right movements to it. To always,
Mm-hmm.
that's always every bullet's going to fly a different flight path. Um,
Elevation and
if we're doing a parallel zero, you're right. The only real compensation theoretically we would have to do is to the elevation. I should aim up or aim low. If
Mm-hmm.
we are doing converging zero, because the laser isn't just going up and down, it has to go to the left or the right, depending on the orientation of your laser. Because again, like you said, the barrel is going this direction, the laser's slightly off to the right. We have to bring it down.
Mm-hmm.
So when we are taking in our hold considerations on a converging zero, we are considering it on a diagonal plane, not a y-axis. So yeah, so there's advantages to both. There's disadvantages. There's slight disadvantages to both. The thing with this class we wanted to emphasize the shooters is when we are all on a converging zero and we have a 50-yard zero, we can take headshots at 100 yards. Not it's not easy, but it's definitely doable, and it's that like probably a higher level of shooting for a student to get into those levels of confidence that like yes, I can actually make that shot. I do have to take my holds into account. They're minimal, right? But I just have to consider what I'm shooting. You know, it's night shooting especially, but shooting in general, but night shooting especially, it's just going to be like golf. You've got to keep swinging. You got to keep going to the range. You can play golf your whole life and take 6 months of it off or a year off of it, and you're going to lose a little bit of that swing. This is just golfing for giants, man. It's just finesse.
Golfing for giants. So let's kind of rotate a little bit on training mentality. I've heard this phrase a lot often, and you brought it up, was the idea that shooting is a diminishing skill.
Mm-hmm.
And and while I understand its context, I think it's overblown. I often think it's overblown. It's not that it doesn't. I'm not advocating. I'm not even at that point advocating for complacency. It's that when you have good shooters, if you miss one dry fire, you're not going to become a C-class shooter overnight.
Mm-hmm.
But those things stack over time to become a bigger problem. But overall, I think overall gun culture has become much better at shooting, much more accurate, much faster in the last 15 years, 10 years. And some of that is likely me projecting my experience on the world.
Yeah, I would say I agree. I think the American rifleman has always been the greatest shooter on the planet. My dog.
Like, let's get back from the dog interruption. So we were talking about better shooters over time, right? As in, like, I've seen the skill actually increase. And I think one of the main reasons for that is because more people are actually participating in training and they're getting better training. More
Totally.
information's available, better information's available, and there are more conversations, and people tend to skew towards sort of a general decent shooter with some exceptions who are very good, or like, what's going on? Are you okay? Do you know what a sight is? And
Yeah, I think gun culture has become a lot more mainstream just in general, especially over the last 6 to 8 years, I'd say.
sure.
Um, it's accelerated a lot over the last four. Obviously, I
Mm-hmm.
think COVID, I mean, it definitely accelerated my experience with it. But just in general, I think the American rifleman has always just been one of the greatest shooters on the planet. You know, the meme that exists out there that the oldest and first American sport is and always will be shooting, gentlemen. You know, and so not shooting, gentlemen, but just shooting, comma, gentlemen. But it's just we've always been in. It's always been kind of a thing that we've done. I think that the GWAT and the interest in people shooting, getting out of the military and carrying that interest into the civilian world, the gun industry itself has grown exponentially. The innovation that happens in garages right now all across America, someone right now is building the next greatest thing in the gun world in their garage right now. No one knows who he is. That's what's cool about this country, is that we have the freedom to tool around and play with our hobbies and innovate. The guns that we had in 2006 were not bad, but the guns that the average civilian has now would smoke the average like American rifle back in like the like the early GWAT years. The technology's gotten better. Drills have gotten better. I mean, the C clamp, for God's sakes, was not something that we did when I was in battalion. We didn't do the whole C clamp thing. That I remember seeing about the time I was getting out, and everyone was kind of like, "What is that weird little way he's holding that rifle?" And now it's kind of the standard. If you see someone holding like their T grip and their like gangster grip in it, you kind of like, "Nah, dude," because we know, the bolt rotates and there's rotation when you fire, right? And so we've become better at it in general. I'm infinitely a more experienced and better shooter than I was when I was in battalion. Granted, I'm also been shooting for 20 years now, and that was really my introduction to this kind of shooting was when I was in the army. But no, I would agree. I think everything's just been building upon and building upon for the years, and people are always trying to. This is gonna sound cynical, stay relevant, but people's pursuit for relevancy often drives innovation and it drives thought-provoking conversations and change.
Yeah, you can't stand still. Now there are some negatives to that for sure. Whether it's chasing trends for trend's sake, or whether it's what I mean, in yeah, going along with the current thing might be another version of saying the same thing. But it's
Mhm.
from a macro scale, it's not so negative. It reminds me of an argument that's made by Nicholas Nassim Taleb in Anti-Fragile, which is the whole succeeds at the cost of the parts, and how essentially how the market works is that they'll have many individual accounts will fail and die, but as a result, the whole thing continues to grow and expand in a direction. And so,
Oh
and that may sound a bit savage, that some companies and some techniques are just going to go away, and maybe should and maybe shouldn't is a different evaluation. But as a result, the whole kind of marches on,
yeah, yeah,
which
and
is
gun wars especially, you see a lot of that. Whether it's in obvious ways like the release of intellectual property after a company goes bankrupt or they sell it off, and that piece of property that they sold off could have been just needing someone else's last set of eyes on it, and they take something that one company started and they put the last bit of that puzzle together, and now they created this big thing. Or it could be like, hey, look what the mistakes they made were. Let's not repeat them.
yep.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, like the compost heap that is the gun industry is always well nitrated.
Well nitrated. All right, so going back to training, how have you seen training and instruction change, and where, if like if you were to give advice to your younger self, where would you start again?
Learn about the firearms themselves. Learn what actually goes into making a gun actually work. A lot of people have a misconception of, oh, if I just take a 12-inch, I'm using absolute bullshit math right now, but if it's, I take a 12-inch, gas tube and put it on a gas block and put it on an X amount of inches rifle, it's going to shoot. And blah, 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 blah. When they don't take into consideration, there's so much testing that goes into like a manufacturer, well, should be going into a lot of testing to release a gun onto the public is, there's like the speed that your bolt carrier group cycles is everything, like it should be on average about 200 inches per second, right? But if you don't got that gun gas right, you're going to make a turd. So like learning what your gun does, right? Like how to build a gun. Like one of the best things that I ever did was learn how to put an AR from every nut, bolt, pin, and build the whole thing out. It's helped me a lot for fixing my guns on the fly. It's helped me as an instructor to fix students' guns or troubleshoot students' guns. I got guys freaking out because they think they bought a $2,800 gun from a company and it's a piece of crap. I'm like, no, it actually does require some lubricant, bro. And like little things like that. Um, Experiment with different calibers, learn what different bullet flights do. There's a lot of variety out there, a lot of really fun stuff. Every gun kind of works differently. I would encourage myself to do a lot of what I did do, though. Battalion gave us an extremely good um, foundation to build upon. I'm not hyper safe that I can't train, but I also know at all times where my finger is on my selector, right? I just little things that have beat into me. I would also emphasize on mag changes, like when yes, if we look at the statistics, the percentage of people that are in a real gunfight that go from their primary to their secondary is very low, very low. But when you're in level one at Darcy, it's very high, and so being able to transition really fast and do fast mag changes keeps you from eating pain skittles. So, um, yeah, I would just encourage myself to learn different types of platforms. I wish I would have learned more pistol. Pistol has always been one that if I don't stay up on my pistol like kind of reps, that one to me seems to be one that fades. But yeah, now I would also encourage students, and I don't want to sound cynical and piss off a lot of our friends, but like the CQB classes are great, they're fine. But there's so much more to it. You need to emphasize physical fitness into it, like doing a gladiator drill, something that makes your heart rate suck, and figure out what it's going to be like, man. Because the reasons for us to enter and clear a room as civilians are very, very low. And if one thing I learned at level one is you're going to lose cops for sure if you've got just two dudes in that building that are going to put up any bit of a fight that kind of know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And if
Well,
we're going to sit there and be like, go do CQB classes, the CQB classes are good for your marksmanship and knowing your holds. But don't get so wrapped up in the footwork and the like dynamic room clearing shit when you can't even clear a stovepipe under night vision.
okay, so it seems like it seems like there's two types of arguments going on here. One of them is like expand your capabilities outside the room, and the other one is sort of an order of business argument. And I the physical fitness one is a universal. It's if you can't physically do it outside of certain curated circumstances, i.e. the flat range, then you're not going to be able to do it in the real world. And we know this from experience, but we also like it's not a very I don't think it's a very complex argument. I think it's actually kind of introductory and for good reason. Like if you can't do it, you can't do it. So, the don't get hyper fixated. It's not even don't get hyper fixated. It's just like I actually started stacking them. I get better at CQB when I deadlift because I am more assured of I'm more solid on my feet because and so they actually complement each other. It's not even like, well, if you're not fit, you're going to die. Well, yes, we know that, but like if you're not going to get fit, you probably don't have the character to be useful in an engaging situation like that. Like if you're not going to
It's
maintain
got
some sense of
complexity into the training. So like when the real complex situation happens, it's not the first time your heart rate's at 190.
exactly, but the other one is this hierarchy of training. Like you need to learn, you should learn how to fix a malfunction before you learn how to CQB a room. I agree. I 100% agree with you on that one. The I think where the morality of the argument. Well, I don't know if I 100%, but the issue with the morality of the argument is I have to pay somebody to go to a CQB class, but I don't have to pay somebody to learn how to fix a malfunction under night vision.
Yeah,
I do,
yeah, but the thing is, I think we as instructors owe it to our students to just ensure that we're incorporating that. If we're going to do a
mm-hmm.
CQB class, let's not get all of our attention on digging corners. That's obviously something that's very important. We need to do that. But like, spend that first couple minutes of a class, like, hey guys, we're gonna go in there and do some less than sexy stuff. But we're gonna practice some malfunctions. Now, obviously, you have to do that when it's a safe way, and that has to be curated to whether or not you're able to use live fire or Sims or whatever it is, right? But I just think that like I don't know, it's everyone wants to like get into the weeds already without even realizing, I don't know,
Yes. Well,
what they're
CQB CQB has been the pinnacle for so long. It has been
yeah.
the ideal, the Navy SEAL, the Army Ranger, the Delta Force, the HRT, the like you're gonna go rescue a hostage. It's cinematic. It's not necessarily easy to depict, but it is like it's the culminating event in the movie, in the story. It's the thing that you
Yeah,
want to
I
build,
get
and
it.
so,
And you
but the
need to do
issue,
it. You know how to do it. You need to know how to do it.
yeah, I'm not trying to dismiss the argument. What I think is
Me
the
either.
what goes on in my head in this one is, yeah, okay, you have a whole bunch of people complaining about you don't need that, you need this, but there's no provision for that. There's no like, okay, and this is making me scratch my own head of like, okay, well, what is anyone gonna would anyone pay for a night vision land nav course, a one night vision land nav course? This is how we do land navigation.
I think
In
so.
urban, like rural, and then urban land navigation. I really like what Singletary is doing over Sky Pirate about these like community days where they get a bunch of different people together to kind of teach different things, and it's on a macro scale, or it's a bigger event versus just like a bunch of guys hanging out in their living room. And so I think that's where the opportunity is, though. I really do. So going back to this course that you took, even these Darcy courses, what shooting used to like people used to like classifying shooting courses as beginner, intermediate, and advanced, which is great if you're a lawyer and terrible if you're a practitioner. How have you? How, in my opinion, as a person of my own opinions, I guess. how is the what were the things that you learned to do at Darcy that were like, oh shoot, that is an actual like eureka, I figured something out moment.
I think for the level one and level two classes, level two is just a build upon and go live with level one's fundamentals. But level one, you learn to move through a hall, through a building just slightly different as a team, as a cell, um, using nonverbal and verbal communication methods. Using a white light as like a not a weapon, but a white light as a tool to push and block and deflect and maneuver and maybe hold down people. Right? If you got a guy that's in the corner of a room, keeping a white light there so he knows that he's being watched the whole time while you can like maneuver on him. That was interesting. A lot of Darcy is going to be SOP related. A lot of that out in TTPs and some of that we can't disclose. But the level or the night vision instructor course, we did a lot of working with like photonic barriers, like pushing through photonic barrier. Why light selection is important. Why switch selection on your firearm is important. I was lacking in the ability to do a slaved, paired white light and visible laser, so do a white light override or non-vis laser even. So like one thing that Darcy, the nickname of it is Truth Island, is it does definitely pull the truth out. Whether your gear sucks or not, you're finding out. You have a lot of methods and you have a lot of ideas and how you might do this and how you might tackle this problem. And then Darcy's like, all right, let's test those theories, buddy.
Let's 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 take it to the mat in an entirely different framing.
Yeah, I would highly encourage people that not because obviously not every course of Darcy is available to the public, but the Tactical Urban Sustainment course or TUSC is a class that has been growing and growing and growing over the last 18 months. And while I think the courses for this year are already mostly filled, they're always expanding to put more classes on the calendar. And then of course there's always 2025. I would highly encourage anyone to get into a TUSC class.
And what's like where do you want to be at? I think something that keeps people away from taking classes is that they set themselves a list of unachievable requirements before they're
Yeah.
willing. Right. I won't. I'm not going to go to I'm not going to go to a rifle course until I
I
have
have
the
this and this and this
I
and this.
have the
Yeah,
perfect setup. Right. I've seen
yeah,
this set. I saw this in a similar thing. I think it was Joe Farewell was talking about competition shooting. Don't wait till you have the perfect gear to start shooting competition. Go shoot some competition, and then you'll and I can
yeah,
attest to. I can test.
100%. That
Mhm.
task is supposed to do exactly what you're describing. So people, there's never the right time to go to Tusk. And I asked Rich Mason, the owner of Darcy, said, is Tusk wasted on me, or what? And he goes, well, with your background, you're going to have an advantage on it. And I'm like, well, here's the thing. There's something I'm going to learn there. And if I ever was going to be instructing it, I want to know what those guys are feeling on day three if I'm an
Mm.
instructor, right? I went through it. But he also emphasized, like, no, Tusk it shows you what you don't have. That's the idea. Sometimes you're going to be caught flat-footed. You might think that your radio game is spot on and your night vision game is spot on, but your water plan doesn't exist. And that is the big thing that comes out of Tusk is water's king and community's queen. And
Mm.
I would say that you're never going to be ready for Tusk and you're not unprepared for Tusk. That's what the idea is to go in there and see where you're deficient, right?
I think that's a really good takeaway too. How many times I think even in my own life, how many times I've held myself back from doing something, taking a learning experience on because I didn't feel ready. And a
Mhm.
learning experience, a course like Tusk, is not the same thing as a selection process for something like Ranger Battalion, where you
No,
want to bring your A game or your Green Berets or your whatever your selection process is, buds, whatever. A course is not an instruction course is not in itself buds or rip or rasp. It's something that you go learn from. Now, going in completely naive will probably hurt you, but
sure.
everyone falls down the learning tree different. So,
Well, the idea behind this is to learn how you can go back to your community. in the event of a disaster, whether it's grid down, man-made, whatever, right? The idea is that services have stopped and things have kind of ground to a halt, and the ugliness in man raises its head very fast. How do we as a community uh, collectively like compile our resources, organize, and then what does that look like when you start getting resisted? Because the outpour is quite creative out there.
This one actually challenges me a little bit. I've been thinking quite a bit on why it is that people get into guns and gun culture, and ultimately, I've come to the conclusion that there's some moral compulsion to it. There's some like people have feel they have a responsibility to their community, and they have a participation in it. And where have I seen this go wrong? Well, in Minneapolis, especially during the George Floyd Summer of Love riots, the primary perpetrators of the destruction were people who were already disenfranchised with their community. They were already disconnected. Now, some of that was by their own choice, and some of it was foisted upon them in some sense.
Hmm.
And so people like a father carries a firearm for the purpose of looking after his family. And while some people might enter into gun culture with, let's call it, naive or somewhat childish aspirations, being a hero is the dichotomy level, the middle tension. But like something like, oh, they saw it in Call of Duty, or they whatever, they wanted to become a thing, they made it their identity. What I think ultimately keeps people in and from burning out is that there's a moral conviction to being capable. And so in the event of Tusk, it's not like it's not the caricature of the prepper who wants to go live alone in the woods. Like if you really want isolation, there's plenty of land to do that on already. You don't need the apocalypse to justify it. Rather, like in the event of there being things happening, societal breakdown when no one has any contributing factors to their own community, multiplies in violence. Right? Does this make sense? So like knowing how to have access to, or like knowing how to clean your water and have access to water in this kind of environment is not only a good skill to have in the event that something is going on, but it's a good skill because it's going to hold your community together instead of turning them into Haitian level, like what's like cannibalism.
Yeah.
I know that cannibalism was more of a intimidating factor in Haiti, but
Well,
X and Y does.
things deteriorate very fast in Tusk. Everyone's got this big ballsy idea of what they're going to do until it's time to do it, right? And look, not everybody needs to be John J. Rambo, right? And some guys are going to be good at like making camps. Some guys are going to be good at cooking. Some guys are going to be good at fighting, right? And everyone needs to kind of figure out whether or not they're about it and one they're or the other, and what a better way to do it with some like controlled failure, you know, an education matrix that gets followed where, we can actually do our training, not just keep you awake all night.
Yeah, and we want to. Like we honestly want to contribute to our communities. I think that's the big paradigm shift that's going on right now. Is that I'm not trying to survive the apocalypse. I want to make my friends' lives better.
Mhm.
And so it'll be interesting to see how it's neat to see that Tusk can contribute in that way.
Yeah, I would encourage people to look out, reach out to the Direct Action Resource Center and put their name in the hat if they're interested in a test class. Maybe I'll be with you in 2025 for a class.
That would be really neat. Okay, so what is it like if you were gonna go? If now we're talking about like Tusk again, what would you want to have? What are some lessons that you'd take away from these kinds of environments? You already talked about water. You've talked about like the recce thing isn't as popular as it was maybe a year ago. But how like what are your big takeaways from this urban training that you can that would help out, like that
You
expand
probably
your
ain't gonna
vision?
want to run with a plate carrier. I'll tell you that.
You're not.
You might not want to be running around in a plate carrier.
Oh,
Depending on what the mission is, right? So if we're doing Tusk, which again, I have not attended Tusk. I know chest rigs are a big way, backpacks, mobility, being able to move people and supplies. I would tell people, I would encourage them to look into their radio plans, get some basics, comm education, get their ham radio license.
Mm.
And I get it, you don't want the SEC to know where you live, dude. You're not that interesting. Uh, at least if you pass the ham technician standard, it teaches you to a standard to understand the radio theory and troubleshoot your gear. All right. And so at least that you have a metric to be weighed against whether or not you can pass the class.
Oh
That's
yeah.
why I encourage people to get their ham license. And then you can actually talk to people and not worry about some booger actually DFing you and getting you a fine. But I would encourage people to look at like their sustainment stuff, right? That's the point of this class. It's not a pipe hitters class, it's a sustainment class. How do we get our community locked down safe and provide, the Maslow's hierarchy needs, security, water, food, shelter, right?
Well that sounds good. Cool. Well, let's wrap it up then. And what so you've had the opportunity to take some recent training. We've talked about night vision, we've talked about Darcy, we've talked about some uh just kind of the expanding levels of training. Man, one of the things that I want to say to you is that this is kind of a private public thing, but I got to thank you for being a sense of encouragement in this community. And so I'm really glad that I'm very thankful for you, to be honest, just as a friend. So thanks for coming on the show. Is
Yeah,
there
well,
anything you
I'm
want?
really
Is there
happy
any,
to see that you had James Lizzie on. That was pretty cool, buddy. That was a
oh,
great,
dude,
great.
it was a great conversation, but I wouldn't be here without people like you. So how about this? Let's close up. Is there anything you want to close on specifically as far as 2024 predictions, the end of the world, or how your life is going?
I would encourage everybody to try to ignore the noise. This is going to be a rough year. It's going to be rough after it. No matter which direction the election is going to go, this is going to be a generation defining, and we're all going to go through it together. Try not to let the trolls online get off of Twitter. Spend less time on it. You know, whether or not you're pissed off about it is not going to change the way some of this shit's going to unroll. So spend your energy and efforts into community. You're right with God. You're right in the gym. Watch what you're eating. Like just start putting your energy and efforts into some positive stuff. And action follows motivation. So if you're gonna
Well,
fill yourself with toxicity, you're gonna be toxic.
I'll have to take that personally then. So thank you very much. All right, Tim. Well, it's been great having you on. We're gonna wrap this up. And so, how do people find you? What's the best way to? If are you going to be public, or is this go to Maxim and stalk you for the rest of your life?
Well, no, you can find me on Instagram, Revere275, like Paul Revere,
Mm-hmm.
Revere275, or Ralph the Airborne Ranger on Twitter. So,
All right, cool. Well, all right, Ralph,
very,
the Airborne Ranger.
very different people.
Yep, very, very, very. All right, cool. Well, thank you very much for being on, man. I look forward to having a conversation with you in the near future. It's been great getting to know you over the last couple of years. We'll talk to you soon. So, for those who are still listening, if you want to support the show, you can head over to redactedllc.com. That's where we're going to have our. I think we have a couple. I think we have 2 hoodies left. So you can head over there, and then that's where you're going to find our releases coming out going forward, as well as if you want to support the show, if you want to support our efforts here, adding some of the more intellectual tools to gun culture, as well as looking at how do we survive and navigate ideological warfare and what people are loosely referring to as 5th generational warfare. You can head over to redactedculture.locals.com to support the show. And with that being said, now go forth and conquer.